On March 4, 1853, Franklin Pierce placed his hand on a law book and affirmed that he would preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Since his birth in the town of Hillsborough, New Hampshire in 1804, the country he was about to lead had changed dramatically. It had more than doubled in size, and its population had grown from 5 million to nearly 25 million. Inventions such as the telegraph, steam power, railroads, and the beginning of the industrial age were changing how Americans communicated, traveled, and lived, laying a path to the world we live in today. But one thing that hadn't changed was the existence of slavery in the southern states, and a determination on the part of many to continue that aspect of American society. Franklin Pierce's presidency would become a casualty in the march toward emancipation for Black Americans, and his place in history tarnished because of the role he played and the views he held. The choices he faced are difficult to comprehend. To preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States also meant to preserve, protect, and defend the institution of slavery. Today, the inevitable seems so obvious, but to Pierce and to many at that moment in time, preserving the Union was more important than abolishing an immoral, racist system of oppression. It was an unusual journey that brought Franklin Pierce to the presidency. A successful lawyer, he began his political career at the age of 24 in the New Hampshire legislature. He served as its youngest speaker, and then went on to serve 2 terms in the United States House of Representatives. In 1837, he began a term as the nation's youngest senator. However, his wife Jane was often in poor health, unhappy with politics in general, and life in Washington in particular. So Pierce resigned his Senate seat in 1842, left Washington, and resumed his law practice in Concord, moving into this very house. At the Democratic National Convention of 1852, Pierce's life took a dramatic change. None of the leading candidates for president could secure the necessary 2/3 vote for nomination. To break the deadlock, Pierce was placed in nomination on the 35th ballot, and subsequently nominated on the 49th. He won the presidency, carrying 27 of 31 states to defeat General Winfield Scott, under whom he had served as a brigadier general in the war with Mexico. But the true key to Pierce's win was that he was a Northerner who politically was not opposed to slavery. For that reason, people hoped he might be able to quiet the increasing tensions between North and South. The New York Times wrote that Pierce would enter the White House with a more general degree of friendly feeling from all sections and all parties than has been usual in some years past. In his inaugural address, which he delivered from memory, Pierce said he foresaw a future without divisive issues to threaten the durability of our institutions or obscure the light of our prosperity. The prosperity he alluded to had been created by a growing United States economy. In the North, that growth was driven by a shift from agriculture to manufacturing. In the South, however, economic growth was powered by and dependent on the labor of enslaved Black Americans. This became even more true after the invention in 1793 of the cotton gin, which removed seeds from cotton, making it possible to harvest much more quickly. This turned cotton into the major Southern export. That cotton was shipped to northern mills like Amoskeag in Manchester to be processed into cloth. Initially, cotton was shipped north by horse-drawn wagon and on waterways. But with the invention of the railroad in the early 1800s, cotton could be shipped more quickly and in larger quantities. The interconnection between North and South grew, making their economies more dependent on each other. While trains moved goods and people, the invention of the telegraph moved information. The latest news became something that was only hours old rather than days. People knew much more quickly of events in a wider world beyond their own town or village. The United States was a collection of regions held together by a common bond and interest. but that bond was challenged by the existence of slavery in some of those regions. It had been a tension since the country's founding, increasing with each passing year and with the addition of each new state to the Union. As railroads and the telegraph increased connections between regions, they also increased those tensions as more and more people in the North began to express opposition to slavery. Franklin Pierce, however, remained steadfast in his belief that it was more important to preserve the Union, no matter the cost to Southern slaves. When Pierce became president, the total slave population of the United States had grown to more than 3 million. As the country expanded west, more territories were organized, and as each of those territories sought statehood, a series of compromises attempted to keep a balance between slave states and free states. When Missouri was admitted as a slave state in 1820, Maine was admitted as a free state. The ensuing decades added 3 slave states, Arkansas, Texas, and Florida, and 3 free states, Michigan, Iowa, and Wisconsin. California's admission as a free state in 1850 upset that balance. However, Senator Henry Clay put together a package of bills that became known as the Compromise of 1850. Among its provisions was increased enforcement of the fugitive slave law. Widespread sentiment, both North and South, believed that the compromise represented a final settlement of the slavery issue, thus putting an end to sectional tensions. That was not to be, and Franklin Pierce would preside as president when tensions escalated to new highs. Pierce had been in office for less than a year when Senator Stephen Douglas of Illinois presented a bill that would allow states to be organized with or without slavery as their constituents may prescribe. The Kansas Nebraska Act, as it became known, was supported by the southern states, but it seemed to Northerners that the entire unsettled part of the country was now open to slavery. Pierce was a loyal Democrat, and the bill had been proposed by an important Democratic senator from a northern state. Opposing it would have split the party, caused resignations in his cabinet, endangered confirmation of government positions, as well as ratification of important international treaties. Pierce endorsed the Kansas Nebraska Act and made support for it a test of party loyalty. But passage of the bill in 1854 split the Democratic Party, with Northern Democrats losing many House seats in the next congressional election. Pierce took the blame for this. By the time his term ended, Kansas itself had become a battleground, with disputed elections and, for a time, 2 legislatures and 2 state constitutions vying for federal approval. The United States Constitution that Franklin Pierce swore to protect said very little about slavery. Indeed, the words slave and slavery never appear in it. With no guidance from the Constitution about how to deal with slavery's expansion, Pierce believed that he was obeying the demands of both duty and practical necessity by supporting the Kansas Nebraska Act. His biographer Peter Wallner concluded that he had to deal with the political system as he found it, but that the system itself prevented any solution of the slavery issue. Here in the 21st century, we know how things turned out. President Pierce did not. He acted on what he knew and felt. He believed that his decisions would prevent the country from falling apart, even though it might lead to the expansion of slavery. In effect, his choices only prolonged the inevitable. It took a civil war and close to 700,000 American deaths to finally settle the slavery issue.